I remember the moment so vividly, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My hands trembled, the kind of tremble that comes from shock. Not fear, not anger, just shock. I was holding the door handle, and something deep in my gut told me not to turn it. But I did. I had to. And when the door creaked open, everything I thought I knew about my life instantly collapsed. The bed was unmade, and at first it didn't register. It wasn't until I saw them, my husband, the man I had built my life with, and her, my best friend since college, tangled together, like strangers who didn't even notice the world crashing around them. I stood there frozen, my mind racing, but my body refused to move. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just watched, silent, invisible, until they saw me. It's a moment you can't prepare for, a betrayal that hits you like a freight train. But here's the thing. What you do after that moment, that's what defines you. Some people crumble, some people walk away, but me, I stayed. Not to forgive, not to forget, but to plan. Because if they thought I would be the victim of this story, they were dead wrong. For as long as I can remember, I've always been the kind of person who puts everyone else first. It wasn't something I thought about. It was just who I was. I prided myself on being dependable and there for the people I loved no matter what. That's why my marriage with James felt like such a reward, like my loyalty and kindness had finally paid off. James was everything I thought I wanted. He was ambitious but grounded. A man who knew how to charm a room without ever seeming insincere. We met through work. He was the kind of man who made you feel like you were the only person in the room. And for years, I truly believed I was. I supported his career and cheered him on during his late nights and big promotions, even when it meant putting my aspirations on hold. That's what love is, right? Sacrifice. Or at least that's what I told myself. And then there was Emma. She wasn't just my best friend. She was like family. We met in college, two girls navigating a world that often felt too big and too chaotic for us. Emma had this way of making me feel safe. She knew my secrets, my insecurities, my dreams. She was there for every big moment of my life. My wedding, the birth of my child, the times when I felt like giving up but didn't because she reminded me why I shouldn't. The two of them were pillars in my life, the people I leaned on when everything else seemed unsteady. I trusted them completely. With James, it was the trust of a wife who never had a reason to doubt. With Emma, it was the trust of a friend who had proven time and again that she was loyal to the core. Together, they were my world, and I had no idea how much of that world was about to collapse. It didn't happen all at once. At first, it was just little things, small details that were easy to overlook. James started coming home later than usual, but he had reasons. There was always a work project, a client dinner, something that sounded reasonable enough. I didn't think much of it because James had always been dedicated to his career. But then those late nights became more frequent. And then the excuses started to feel rehearsed, almost too perfect. I remember the night he came home smelling like a perfume I didn't recognize. I asked him about it, laughing it off, and he said it must have been from someone at the office. It was such a casual response, but it didn't sit right with me. Then there was his phone. James wasn't secretive before. He would leave his phone on the counter or the coffee table without a second thought. But suddenly, it was always with him, either in his pocket or face down on the table. I didn't want to be that kind of wife, the one who snoops or jumps to conclusions. But the way he'd tense up every time it buzzed made it hard to ignore. I told myself I was overthinking it, that I had no reason to be suspicious. But once you start noticing something, you can't unsee it. Around the same time, Emma became distant. It wasn't obvious at first. She was still friendly, still her usual self, but she started canceling plans more often. We used to meet up regularly, our coffee dates a ritual we both cherished. But now, she was always too busy or caught up with work. I told myself she was probably just overwhelmed and that it had nothing to do with me. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. There was one day, though, that I can't forget. I found a lipstick stain on James's shirt while folding the laundry. It was faint, almost like a smudge, but it was there. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, trying to convince myself it was mine. But it wasn't. It was a shade I didn't own, and the realization hit me like a brick. My mind raced with explanations that didn't involve betrayal, but every one of them felt like a lie. I couldn't bring myself to ask him about it, not yet. I needed more than just a stain. I needed the truth. By this point, the doubts in my mind were growing louder, but I still clung to the idea that I was imagining things. I didn't want to believe that the two people I trusted most could be keeping something from me. But the pieces were starting to fit together in a way I couldn't ignore. And that's when I decided that I had to find out the truth, no matter what it cost me. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, that I was seeing things that weren't there. But the doubts had taken root, and I couldn't shake them. So one night after James fell asleep, I did something I had never done before. I took his phone. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through his messages and call logs, half expecting to find something incriminating right away. But there was nothing. His phone was immaculate, too perfect, like it had been scrubbed clean. That alone felt like a red flag. I told myself to stop, to let it go, but I couldn't. The next day, I started paying closer attention to everything: his routine, his behavior, his excuses. The more I looked, the more cracks I saw. His explanations for his late nights started to contradict themselves. Small inconsistencies that might not have meant anything on their own, but together painted a picture I couldn't ignore. I noticed how he avoided looking me in the eye when he talked about work, and how he'd deflect questions with jokes or sudden affection. It was subtle, but it was there, and I was starting to see it everywhere. Around this time, I reached out to Emma again, trying to salvage some sense of normalcy. I invited her over for coffee, something we hadn't done in weeks, but she declined, saying she had plans she couldn't cancel. She sounded nervous, almost rushed, and when I pressed her for details, she changed the subject. That was when it hit me. The unease I'd been feeling about James wasn't just about him. It was about her, too. The two of them, the two people I trusted most, were suddenly both acting like strangers. I needed answers, but I couldn't ask them directly. Not yet. So I did the only thing I could think of. I hired a private investigator. It felt extreme, like something out of a bad movie, but I didn't see another option. I needed proof, real proof, not just my gut feeling or a lipstick stain. I told the investigator everything, and he promised to dig into it, to follow James and see if there was anything to uncover. I remember sitting in my car after our meeting, staring at the steering wheel, wondering if I was about to ruin my own life, but I had to know. The first few days were quiet. The investigator checked in with me, but said he hadn't found anything unusual. I started to doubt myself again, thinking maybe I'd made a mistake, that I was letting my imagination run wild. But then, a week later, I got the call. I'll never forget his voice when he said, "You're going to want to sit down for this." He had photos, James and Emma together at a hotel, their body language unmistakable. There was no denying it anymore. They weren't just betraying me. They were doing it boldly, almost like they thought they'd never get caught. I stared at the photos for hours, every detail burning into my mind. The way he smiled at her, the way she touched his arm. It was a version of them I had never seen before, a version that didn't include me. It was like looking at strangers. But instead of breaking down, something inside me clicked. I realized I had a choice. I could confront them then and there, let my emotions take over, or I could do something else. Something smarter. Something they'd never see coming. I decided to wait, to watch, to plan. If they thought I would crumble under the weight of their betrayal, they were wrong. I wasn't going to let them take everything from me, not without a fight. And so I began to prepare for what would come next, knowing it would change all of our lives forever. Once I had everything I needed, I started planning. Not out of rage or spite, but because I wanted to take control of a situation where I'd felt powerless for too long. I decided to confront them, but I didn't want it to be in some private, quiet moment where they could deny or dismiss what they'd done. No, this needed to be undeniable. It needed to happen in a way that they couldn't escape or twist into something else. So, I planned a dinner party. I sent out invitations to close friends and family, making it seem like a celebration of James's latest promotion. He, of course, was thrilled at the idea, thinking I was supporting him, as always. I made sure to invite Emma too, making it clear that her presence was essential. I went through the motions of planning the evening, choosing the menu, arranging the decorations, and even picking out the perfect dress, all while carrying the weight of what I knew. Every smile and every casual word exchanged with James and Emma felt like a test of my patience. But I stayed calm. This wasn't the time to let emotions take over. When the evening arrived, the house was filled with laughter and conversation. James was in his element, charming everyone as usual. Emma mingled easily, slipping into her role as my best friend without missing a beat. I watched them, wondering how they could pretend so effortlessly, but it only strengthened my resolve. I waited until everyone had finished their meals, until the wine glasses were nearly empty and the room was buzzing with contentment. That's when I stood up and tapped my glass. I just wanted to say a few words, I began, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. I looked at James, then Emma, and finally at everyone else in the room. Tonight, we're here to celebrate a milestone in James's career, but I'd like to take a moment to share something I've been working on too. I clicked a button on the remote I'd hidden in my hand, and the projector screen lit up behind me. At first, the room was filled with confusion as the photos appeared. They were subtle at first, James and Emma together at a cafe, their faces close as they laughed over coffee. Then came the hotel photos, unmistakable in their intimacy. The room fell silent. I could hear the sharp intake of breaths, the shifting in chairs. James's face turned pale, his confident demeanor crumbling in an instant. Emma looked like she wanted to disappear, her hands trembling as she reached for her glass. "You see," I said, turning to face them directly, "I've spent years trusting the two of you, believing in your loyalty and love. But these photos tell a different story. They show me who you are." My voice trembled, but I refused to falter. "You both betrayed me, but tonight, I take my life back." James stammered, trying to find words, but there was nothing he could say that would undo what everyone had just seen. Emma looked at me, tears in her eyes, but I didn't flinch. I wasn't here for their apologies or their excuses. This was about reclaiming my narrative, about standing in front of everyone who mattered and showing them that I wasn't broken, that I wouldn't let their betrayal define me. The room erupted into murmurs, Some people confronting James and Emma directly, others looking at me with a mix of shock and admiration. But I didn't stay to watch the fallout. I had already arranged for a car to take me to a hotel for the night. I left them there, surrounded by the wreckage of their choices, knowing that I had done what I needed to do, not just for myself, but to make sure they understood the depth of what they had destroyed. The morning after the dinner party, I woke up in a quiet hotel room, the weight of the previous night still pressing on me. But for the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of peace. The storm had passed, not because it was over, but because I had taken control of it. I didn't wait for apologies or explanations. I didn't need them. Instead, I made my next moves with clarity and purpose. The first step was filing for divorce. I remember sitting across from my lawyer, laying out every piece of evidence I had collected. The photos, the timeline, the lies. They painted a clear picture of betrayal. James's confident facade cracked when he was served the papers. He tried to call me, to plead his case, but I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. In the settlement, I made sure to protect myself. The house, the savings, the things we had built together. He lost the right to claim any of it when he chose to betray me. As for Emma, I made a decision not to confront her directly. What was there to say to someone who had already shown me who they were? I didn't need her explanations or her guilt, but I didn't have to do anything to ensure there were consequences for her actions. Word spread quickly among our mutual friends about what had happened, and the fallout was inevitable. Emma's reputation took a hit, and in a professional setting where integrity mattered, her choices caught up with her. She lost her position at work shortly after, not because of me, but because the truth has a way of coming out. The weeks that followed weren't easy. There were moments when the quiet of my new life felt overwhelming, when I missed the familiarity of what I had lost, even though I knew it wasn't real. But little by little, I began to rebuild. I redecorated the house, turning it into a space that felt like mine. I started going to therapy, not to make sense of what they had done, but to understand why I had ignored the warning signs for so long. And for the first time in years, I focused on myself, on my needs, my dreams, my happiness. James tried to salvage his reputation, of course. He made public statements to our friends, claiming it had been a momentary lapse in judgment, a mistake he deeply regretted. But the truth was already out, and there was no undoing the damage. The man who had once seemed so invincible now looked small, diminished by his own choices. He faced public humiliation, and while I didn't take pleasure in it, I couldn't deny the satisfaction of seeing justice served. Emma reached out to me once, sending a long email filled with apologies and explanations. I didn't reply. I didn't need her words to move on. Forgiveness, if it ever came, wasn't something I owed her. It was something I would decide for myself in my own time. For now, all I cared about was letting go of the hold she and James had on my life. Today I stand in a place I never thought I'd reach. I'm not the same person I was before all of this happened, but I've learned to see that as a good thing. I've learned to prioritize myself, to trust my instincts, and to let go of people who don't deserve a place in my life. I won't say it's been easy, but I can say it's been worth it. And if there's one thing I've taken away from all of this, it's that betrayal doesn't define you. What defines you is how you choose to rise from it. And I've chosen to rise stronger than I ever thought possible. Looking back, it's hard to believe how much my life has changed. There was a time when I thought my world would fall apart if I lost the people I trusted most. But what I've come to realize is that losing them wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new. Betrayal has a way of teaching you what you're made of. And if you let it, it can push you to discover a strength you didn't know you had. I've learned that the people who hurt you don't deserve the power to define your story. That's something only you can do. They don't get to decide your worth, your happiness, or your future. And they certainly don't get to break you unless you let them. Yes, the pain was real. Yes, it was excruciating. But I came out of it stronger, more sure of myself, and more determined to never settle for less than I deserve. It wasn't easy to forgive myself for not seeing the signs sooner, or for giving my trust so freely to people who didn't deserve it. But over time, I've come to realize that the betrayal wasn't a reflection of me. It was a reflection of them. Their choices, their actions, their flaws. And while I can't change what happened, I can control what comes next. To anyone watching this who has been through something similar, I want you to know that you're not alone. It's okay to feel broken, angry, and lost at first. But don't let those feelings define you. Use them as fuel to rebuild, to grow, and to demand more for yourself. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that heartbreak doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the start of something even better. Have you ever faced betrayal like this? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories, your thoughts, your struggles, and your triumphs. Leave a comment below and let's talk about it. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories like this one. Sometimes the hardest moments in life teach us the most important lessons. And those are the stories worth sharing. Thank you for listening to mine.